Hi, welcome to BISTRO Buzz, Season 3, Conversations with Sutapa Basu, hosted on my Facebook page, whose link is www.facebook.com/Sutapa, SUTAPA, 20. So, BISTRO Buzz is all about buzzing. We talk about art, we talk about culture, entertainment, lifestyle, books, poetry, or just exchange random reflections. Basically, it's a conversation between you and me. Bistrobus also hosts a lot of inspirational people who are experts at their fields, and conversations with them give us a lot of food for thought. So the table at Bistro Buzz is heaped with fine cuisine on many evenings. You are welcome to come in, taste it, talk about it, listen to it, argue about it, or just enjoy it. So look out for the space at Bistro Buzz at 6:30 p.m. And now, let's welcome our next guest on Bistro Buzz Season 3. A people's voice, Veena Venugopal. Welcome, Veena, to Bistro Buzz.
Thank you, Sutapa. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And now let's just speak a little about you. So, Veena Venugopal is the author of 3 books. In August 2022, her work, Independence Day, A People's History, was published by Juggernaut to mark the 75th year of India's independence. Previously, she had written a book on the Indian mother-in-law, The Mother-in-Law, which was published by Penguin in 2014, and a collection of essays on books and reading. Would you like some bread with that book, which was published by Yoda Press in 2012? She was the founding editor of Blink, the Hindu Business Line's weekend magazine, and Briefcase, the Hindu's news digest app. She now writes Modern Times, a monthly column on contemporary society for the Hindu Sunday magazine. So, Veena, you are an author, you are a journalist. Blink, the Hindu business magazine, was founded by you, and your features appear on all the renowned broadsheets, don't they? So, but who is the real Venugopal? Can you tell us something about your growing up years and your family and so on?
Yeah. So I grew up in a township in near Cochin. So my father worked for a public sector fertilizer company, and we were about it was a township of about 10,000 families. And so I grew up in what I often describe as a Nehruvian ideal, where we all lived in similar houses. Our fathers, usually some mothers, went to work in the same company. We studied in the company school. We prayed in the company temple. We shopped at the company market. We watched movies at the company theater. So it was a very sort of homogenic environment. It was like an ideal. And so I think that growing up in a township really crafts the person in you. And amongst my friends and people who I went to school with, it is a great source of lovely nostalgia, because it's very different from growing up in any other kind of environment. And even when I was there, even though I appreciated all the benefits that the township brought to me, I always also had this need to escape. I felt like I was quote unquote trapped in this place, and I knew that the world outside was bigger and more exciting, and I wanted to get out. So I think my early years, most of my decisions were made on the basis of how can I get out of here. So when I finished my class 10, even though I was a very good student academically, and I used to play sport, I was a national level table tennis player, and and
Oh,
so therefore that usually meant that you could get into a medical college. And my grandmother was a doctor. She was really keen that I was the youngest grandchild, and none of the grandchildren before me had become doctors. She was rather keen that I pursue medicine. And I thought about it myself, but the school that I went to in the township had 11th and 12th for the science stream. And I was like, oh, if I say that I want to do medicine, then my parents are going to insist that I continue in the same school. So I said I want to switch streams and do commerce only because it meant that I could get out of there. So I did commerce in my 11th and 12th, which meant I went to another school which was outside the township. I had to catch a public bus to reach the bus stop from where the school bus would pick me up. So it was my first step in breaking away from the township. And then when I finished my 12th standard, I went to Chennai for college, and then I've sort of lived away from my parents ever since. Because And then I started working and so on and so forth. So when I finished my college, I mean, so this is in the mid to late 90s, and when you come from a middle class family, I was really focused on what would get me a job quickly, and so I decided to pursue an MBA. So I did an MBA, and I worked in HCL, and I lived in Belfast for a while. I was looking after mergers and acquisitions for Belfast, for HCL in Belfast. But I'd gotten married right off, right. Uh, I mean, just when I finished my MBA to my senior from school. And so after living in Belfast for about 3 years, I had this sort of dilemma as to whether my then husband should join me there or I should come back. And we went back and forth. And finally, I decided to come back. And then I thought, if I'm going back now, and if I have to like look for a new job and resettle in a different economy, then I'd like to give one chance to doing something that I really wanted to do, which was to sort of make my career as a writer. So when I came back to India, I started working Times of India as a salesperson, and I went to night school in journalism
oh,
in Bombay. And one of my professors in journalism college said, "Hey, the Hindu business line is looking for someone, and you understand the business world, and you are a reasonably good writer. So why don't you go there for an interview?" And I did, and I got the job, and I sort of quit my job in the Times of India as well as dropped out of college because it was evening college, and as you know, newspaper jobs tend to be very evening centric. And I started working in the business line. So it was a combination of factors. Around the time that I was in my last year in Belfast, I had started writing a blog. In those days, Live Journal used to be the biggest place
right.
where people like me would spend all our time. And so my blog was reasonably popular. So I sort of knew I had the knack for it, and that I was not a bad writer. And then, and then there was this sort of not an opportunity, but like I thought it was a good excuse to carve out an opportunity of having come back to India and not really wanting to do what I was doing in the corporate world. And so it sort of helped me jump. And now, in just relating all of this, I'm thinking back and thinking that a lot of my decisions have been made, a lot of my life decisions have been made on the basis of what I don't want to do or where I don't want to live, rather than really on the basis of what is it that I would actually like to do. But this logic and reasoning has worked out for me. So I worked as a journalist for a long time in various publications, Business Line and Outlook and Mint, and um, and then in 2014 I joined the Hindu again, and that was when I was given the opportunity to sort of start a new weekend paper for the Business Line. So it's called Be a Link, and I mean, it ran. Um, it was like, for me, it was the best job possible, sort of to craft a magazine which went on to win several awards. A lot of our stories have won awards in various categories in India, and sort of just reaching out to new writers, finding new content, at a time when content on the internet was also sort of becoming a larger chunk of what people consumed. So finding great writers who wrote for one medium and bringing them into another medium. So it was a fantastic experience. And then I moved to the Hindu, and I started Briefcase, which is a daily news digest app. My big regret is that neither of my products have survived me in the Hindu. So after I have quit, subsequently, both of those have sort of sunsetted, as they say in corporate speaks, in some form or the other. So for the last few years, I've been working in the corporate sector, doing editorial strategy for a large multinational company. But I've been writing on the side, and the project that had been consuming me for the last 3 years was this book that you mentioned at the top of the show, Independence Day: A People's History, where I went around finding people who were around India, around and sort of conscious, not really small babies at the time when India was gaining independence, and sort of trying to find the history of the country through the history of its people. Um, in this sort of long saga, my marriage ended. I have a daughter who turned 18 a couple of days ago, and I live here. She's in school, in boarding school, and it's been an interesting journey. So yeah, I mean, really bookended by things that I didn't want to do and places I didn't want to be in.
Great. It's been a great journey. Not just a good journey, a great journey. I mean, I think your name is there among all the reputed, media publications, Mint and the Times of India, and of course the Hindu. I mean, nothing can be better than
Yes,
the Hindu.
I've been very fortunate, I must say. Yeah.
And I'd like to just welcome the people, the viewers. Mona Verma is here, Rachel Thomas is here, and Mona is saying something, so I'll just put that comment. So she says, I totally hear you. We grew up in Behel Township. Absolutely, Mona. And I also totally relate because I've also grown up in these cantonments, which are again
Uh-huh.
these very inclusive, homogenized, I mean, societies. But
Yes.
and while we are there, we don't realize how good it is, and we all want to escape. Only when we escape is when we realize, oh my God, that was really nice.
Yeah,
But it was,
totally. I agree.
yeah, so we've all been through that, nostalgia, as I should say. Now, two of your books, The Mother-in-Law and Independence Day, are both of them are totally enthralling. I really love them. So I read this, and when I was reading it, I never thought that I would actually, meet the author, because I really enjoyed this, and of course this one, which is absolutely, what should I say? It's beautiful, the book. So,
Thank
but
you.
both the themes are as different as chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
Yet we can see the voice of ordinary people coming through the book, and that is how I think readers have related to both the books a lot. And so I've always been curious as to what made you choose. Let's talk about the first one, the in-laws relationship. What was the trigger that made you think of this idea?
So, really speaking, both of these books started in point A and sort of ended in point C. So 2 years before the publication of The Mother-in-Law, I had written a book called "Would You Like Some Bread with That Book," as you
Hmm.
mentioned at the
Hmm.
top of the
Yeah,
show, which was a
yeah.
collection of essays on books and reading. And really, how that came about is in 2010 when I was working in Mint, and I used to write a column on books. I can't remember the name. I mean, one section of it was called "I Read It So You Don't Have to," where I reviewed trashy books, and then I wrote another section which was not quite a review, but it's sort of like a little bloggy sort of my engagement with something that I was reading at the moment. And I went on a trek to the Everest Base Camp without having trained for it at all, which is not something I'd recommend to anybody. And so when I came back, I wrote about the two books that I read, which sort of contributed to my almost devastating experience on the trek. So, uh, One was Into Thin Air, which is like a famous book about the traffic jam in Everest, which sort of cost the death of, I think, 12 people. And in that book, the author describes the trek up to the base camp in one paragraph. And so it's like, I mean, this has to be easy. I'm only going to the base camp. I mean, if he doesn't even sort of talk about it, I don't understand why people are asking me if I'm training for it and things like that. So my preparation before before the trek involved lying in bed and reading this book. And then when I was on the trek, I was reading a book called Into the Void, which was about another expedition, but in the Andes in South America, and where the author actually breaks his leg um, while sort of summiting a mountain alone, and it's about, like, how his miraculous sort of escape from the jaws of death. And so I said that, like, as I was trudging up, like feeling miserable, etc., etc., I kept like thinking of the author in my backpack, who was the only person who could feel how bad, who could understand how bad I was feeling. So when I came back, I wrote this piece. And then the publisher at Yoda Press, Arpita Das, called me and said, "This is so hilarious. Why wouldn't you write a whole book, which is a collection of essays about this?" So that book is actually quite a funny book on. It's like both a coming of age sort of memoir, as well as a look at how books have shaped my life. And so Chiki Sarkar was at Penguin at the time, and she called me and she said, "Look, I'm trying to. I think we should write a book on the Indian mother-in-law." Because this is like so phenomenal, and there are so many jokes about it, and I think that you have the right sort of comic voice to write about it. So I said, "Yeah, sure, that sounds good." And so I started researching about this, thinking I'm going to write a funny book about the Indian mother-in-law.
And
And
there
then
is
I
two,
cast and then
there
I
is
cast
two.
a wide net, and I start speaking to daughters-in-law. And then I realized that these stories are so horrific that I cannot, do it the disservice of writing about it comically, because this is a real issue. It sort of really shapes people's lives and their fundamental sense of who they are, and how they live, and their happiness. And so, in the process of reporting on that book, I moved from point A, which was let's write a funny book about mothers in law, to what became a pretty serious, grim book about mothers in law. And if you recall, like, that was also the time when the SARS Bahu
Yes.
phenomena was at its peak.
Hmm.
So, there was a lot of sort of cultural um, I'm going to say there was a lot of cultural conversation about the mother-in-law, whereas what should have been is there should have been a lot of cultural arguments about it. And I thought that it was therefore my job to present that counter argument, and talk about how the mother-in-law, who was a cruel sort of fixture on television by then, was also a cruel fixture in many women's lives in India.
So that was the trigger. I mean, you're right. You're very right that that is the time when the mother-in-law, the whole dilemma of should you. I mean, the way it's portrayed also in the serials which were coming on TV at that time, uh, how much of it was realistic and how much of
Yeah.
it was painful.
Fictionalized, yes, yeah. So the tendency, at least in normal conversation, was to think that, oh, the mother-in-law as demonized in a
Mm,
fictitious show. um, but I mean, truth was that, I think that sort of also allowed mothers-in-law the liberty to be a little bit more cruel than they otherwise would have been, because they're seeing these examples on television, and then the lines between fiction and real life blur. Like, just like I feel like now, a lot of people are more bigoted than they would have been like 10 years ago, because it's okay to say some things now, uh, and it was not okay to say some things, these
yes.
same things then. So similarly,
Absolutely.
when you see something and you watch it and you internalize it, you do feel that, oh, like, if people are behaving like this, then it's okay for me to behave like this as well. So yeah, so it was shocking for me, because I really did not set out to write a grim book on the Indian mother-in-law, but I realized that the reality was that some of it is really grim. and then I don't want to gloss over it by making a joke of it.
So when you interviewed these daughters-in-law, uh, I'm really curious to know how did the stories come out of them, because it's very natural to sort of submerge whatever is painful. So what was the way that you persuaded them to relive basically their um, their experiences?
So I encountered two kinds of women. Ones who were like, I don't want to talk about it because I try not to think about it. And the others who were like, I'm so desperate. I'm sort of just bursting with it inside me. I'm just so desperate to want to talk to someone that they would say yes to me even before I'd finished asking them. And so it was two kinds, and so it really was not that difficult for me to find subjects. And I found, like, I spoke to about 80 odd women, and I sort of got eventually sort of picked the story so that I was covering a wide variety and a range of sort of experiences. Um, I mean, I sort of I featured an Austrian girl who's married to like a West Delhi Punjabi family, and she was like really interesting because all of this was alien to her and she could not make sense of it at all. And even much after the book had come out, she would call me and say that, "Hey, this happened. Is this normal?" you know, and so I would have to tell her, look, like, nothing is normal. It's what you want to put up with or what you don't want to put up with. There isn't anything that is a blueprint of this is okay and this is not. Like I said, it wasn't that difficult to get people to talk. Most of them were very, very sort of happy to voice their experience. Names had been changed in most of the instances that I've quoted. So that was the only anonymity that they required. And once they knew that it wasn't directly sort of attributed to them by their name, they were very okay to about sharing their stories. For me, at least, a couple of things that came up is that I had this perception that if you were an educated working woman, therefore you are financially secure, at least compared to someone who's not, then you have like a greater say in that relationship, and that you are allowed a greater ground to define how you want to be in that relationship. So for me, when I encountered women like this who were not sort of able to define their that boundaries in the relationship, that to me was the most shocking. That our sense of family and our sense, especially as women, to be tied into households is so strong that you will not, use the power that you have to make it a livable situation for yourself. There is one lady who works in the All India Radio, and her story to me, I mean, it was just like every time I would listen to it on tape because I was recording all of these women, I would have to like stop because it was just like I would choke up, and so it was unimaginable to me that. And when I met her, like before she started telling me the story, she was like just like a person like me. She's worked all her life. She earns a living. She has agency. She has autonomy, and then like she tells me the story, and I'm like blown away because I cannot imagine someone like her would live a life like that and continue to live a life like that. So it was very revealing to me because uh, I feel that how you are in the outside world is often not how you are in the sort of confines of the family. And I felt very privileged to have found the strength to, at least know where to draw the line in my life. And it was shocking to me that a lot of women out there don't.
So sometimes we can't guess what is going on behind the face that we see, because I
Yeah,
think
we
all.
often can't guess what's going on. Yeah.
Have you ever thought of writing a similar book about mothers-in-law, their point of view?
I did actually. When I finished the book, I thought that I should actually now flip. the camera and look at the story from the mother's and law's point of view. And I genuinely thought that that was going to be my next project, but sort of life and my work commitments and things like that sort of took over my life, and I did not write a book for 6 more years. So uh, originally I did intend to, although one of the women that I do interview in the book is both a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law herself. So she was who I was seeing as the pivotal character who could see both sides of the coin,
Okay.
and it was really revealing uh, to for her to sort of hear herself tell me her story with her mother-in-law, and then for her to hear herself tell me her story with her daughter-in-law, and then I found her like at many points thinking, hmm, maybe this is me. Maybe I'm perpetuating the same thing to my daughter in law that my mother in law did to me, and I did not think of it. So I feel also that a lot of times, these relationships are not fraught because the mothers in law are horrible people. I think it is conditioning, it is expectation, it is just this sort of this envelope we live in, and we're like, oh, but my mother-in-law was said this to me when I got married, so maybe the expectation is that I do too, uh, that we sort of take our tips from history, and we don't really sit down and critically analyze our own lives. And then when forced to, they realize that themselves that, oh, like, why am I being like this brings me no joy, to sort of ensure that my daughter-in-law does these three things, and the only reason I'm asking her to do these three things is because my mother-in-law herself had asked me when I was a young daughter-in-law. Um, so, uh, so she provided that little bit of an angle. But in fact, when I spoke to her, I was like, "Oh no, I want to do a book, only sort of capturing voices like hers." But I never got around to doing that.
Maybe the next one.
Maybe the next one. Although I feel like now, in the last 10 years since I first started reporting on the book, a lot has changed. And a lot of that relationship, especially amongst younger women in urban cosmopolitan homes, is a lot better. And I'm always happy to see that. I'd rather not write a book than, than hear about trauma like this. So
Now
maybe the
let's
moment has passed.
Yeah, and now let's come to your next book, which is really amazing. I mean, I can't imagine somebody doing what you did. So, you've written in the intro, you've written about your feelings because when you saw this picture of a teacher and students standing in the middle of flood waters and raising the flag on Independence Day, and you spoke. I mean, you felt their dedication, coming through. But
Yeah.
even then, you decided to go out into the country, different parts of the country, and look for people who had actually lived through that experience of the Independence Day in 1947. So, how did this idea come?
So again, this book also started at point A and then went on to point C. So I was sort of commissioned to write a book on the Me Too movement in India,
Hmm.
and I tried sort of working on it for a couple of years, but it was like horribly hard to report on, especially because there are very few cases that are filed, so there are no court documents, and I often felt like I was just getting sucked into a he said she said kind of narrative where I couldn't independently verify either of those. And so I was scratching my head and wondering what to do. And then again, I mean, so by then Chiki, who was the publisher of Penguin, had moved to
Yeah,
Juggernaut, and so this
definitely.
that the Me Too book was signed with her for Juggernaut. And so Chiki and I were talking about this, and I was like, I don't know if I can go forward with the book. And then we were talking about some random this and that, and then I sort of told her a story about my grandparents, and the independence movement, and uh, I mean the sort of the primary premise of it was that my grandfather was in the police force. So at that time, his bosses were the British, so he was sort of fighting the freedom fighters on behalf of the British as a police officer. And my grandmother was like a very staunch Gandhian, and so it was both sort of comical as well as these sort of complex binaries that didn't seem to bother upset their relationship with each other at all, while today we can't see eye to eye on someone who disagrees with us. So I think it was just a random conversation about that, and then we said so we started talking about like, oh yeah, and then she sort of remembered a couple of other people's stories around the time, and we're like, look, we should do this. I mean, there is no oral history about, how ordinary people uh, marked Independence Day. And so, shall we do that? And then it was the 75th year. So I figured, like, even if you're, like, say, 4 years old, when in 1949, you are about 79 now, right? And so these stories are sort of rapidly vanishing. And then it became like this sort of breakneck, let's find these people, let's get their stories on board. And it was fascinating for me. I mean, I have not learned more in any other exercise than I did in reporting on this book. And it was also heartbreaking. I mean, one of the people who's featured in the book died between my speaking to him and the publication of the book. Since the publication of the book, three other people have passed away, and so I feel both fortunate to have got their stories into the book, and I also feel bereft that there are so many other great stories that are gone without being told. In fact, a lot of people sort of wrote to me after the book came out saying, "Oh, you should speak to my grandmother. You should speak to my mother." Kate Kishet, the photographer, insisted that I speak to her mother, even though I told her I'm not sure like what I was going to do with it because I don't know whether we will update the book or what. She's like, "I don't care. Just record her. Just get her story." And so it was an amazing exercise, frustrating at times because also it was COVID, and these people were all old, so it was very difficult for me to figure out uh, where the risks were. So some of these were done on phone calls because I did not want to fly in and sort of infect them with COVID. So there are a lot of precautions around it. At the same time, I was going crazy because I was like, no, no, these people are all really old, and I want to get their stories in. So it was quite a whirlwind, but a fantastic experience. I mean, this is definitely something that I will remember forever. This experience of reporting on the book on these stories, and I learned so much. I mean, one thing that you've read so much about Indian history, and especially like a lot of Indian history is around our independence movement, and you think that you know pretty much what happened, and then you realize that individual stories are so different from recorded stories that you realize that, oh, that is just what the books tell you, but what the people tell you is a whole other story, and sometimes so for example, this gentleman that I spoke to, he grew up in Rouse Avenue, which is less than 5 kilometers from Red Fort, where Nehru and Mountbatten went and spoke at the on August 14th, and he did not even know that this event was happening. So some of it is like how when we are part of history, it shapes who we are, and some of it is also who we are, and we don't know like a historic event is happening down the road, and both of it is are real human experiences. And so it was a fascinating exercise for me, and I wouldn't trade this for anything. So I'm so glad that we had this sort of brainwave when we did, and I did the story in this tearing hurry because it was important to record as many as possible. And while it's still a small drop in the ocean, I feel grateful that we at least have that drop.
It's fascinating for anybody who will read it, I think. I mean, it was fascinating for me, of course. And you will not believe that after I read your book, so I also was thinking in the same terms that people whom I know, why
Yeah,
should I not record, and keep it just for
yeah,
posterity, for simply maybe for my family to go back to it, and
yeah,
listen. Now, I was, the story of this Tarun Kumar Roy from Krishnanagar was
yeah,
really touching. You know how they raised the flag twice,
yeah,
once
yeah,
for Pakistan, once for India.
yeah,
I have actually gone to that area. I have visited Krishnanagar, and even today, you have these stories of border crossing, which
yeah,
sadly goes on even today. So these were stories which I really related to. Another thing that I mean, you have spoken, and I have heard it from my mother, is that how the freedom movement and Gandhi were
Hmm.
synonymous during that
Yeah,
time. I mean,
yeah,
she tells me that she was just about 6 or 7 years old, but she says that whenever people spoke, I mean, there were so many stories, so many eulogies about Gandhi, about Bapuji, and how the conversation, whatever was he was doing, his activities would resonate in their home, and they
yeah.
would, even as children, they would hear about it. So every region, of course, had its fair share of freedom fighters. So why do you think this happened? That the freedom fight was so synonymous with Gandhi.
I think that's the charisma of the man. I mean, I spoke to a gentleman who was a 6 or 7 year old in a remote district, in a remote part in a district in Tamil Nadu called Tiruvarur. And he's like, I'd never seen a white person. Like, for me, the British
Yeah,
were not a concept that I could sort of, identify with. But I knew about Gandhi. And when Gandhi came to, say, any part in Tamil Nadu, and we would hear about it, similarly, this gentleman who grew up in the Gurdaspur district, on the Pakistan side of the border, they had nothing. It was a road, it was a mud track that led to their house. They did not have electricity, and things like that. But they knew about Gandhi, and really it was only newspapers and radio. Like, they don't have the internet, or information was asymmetric, b not democratized. And so it's unbelievable to me. I mean, why an advertising person has not written a book on Gandhi's power of communication is beyond my understanding, because it is unbelievable how his message sort of went through. It's so uh, it's a study by itself. I mean, I cannot tell you like what it is about Gandhi that sort of helped carry this message, but the fact is that it did, and everyone knew about him. And the other thing is that these freedom fighters were great heroes. So there was like this whole sort of they were the icons, right? I mean, maybe it helped that Bollywood was not so big then, and cricket was not so big then, and so people had like a brain space to think about what was happening in the political landscape. But they were their sort of Bollywood and cricket stars of their time, and it's unbelievable to me. And so, also the other sort of revealing thing is that, like I said, a lot of people did not even know that independence was declared. I mean, they found out much later. But everybody that I spoke to, without like a single exception, remembered where they were when they heard Gandhi was killed. So that really is the power of Gandhi. That the news of his passing was a bigger and a stronger news than the fact that the country had gained independence. So, I mean, I think that sort of explains it, right? I mean, it was entirely about Gandhi and his charisma.
So what they, if you read up about the history of the freedom fight, war for, I mean, independence fight, the struggle, they say that the first lot of the freedom fighters, that is Tilak, Gokhale, and all these people, they were people who were very educated and educated in the universities and the colleges that the British had put
Yeah.
up. So they were very, I mean, they were fiery about the fact that India should become independent. But how could they make the masses understand was something that was beyond them.
Yeah.
And it was Gandhi who,
Yeah.
when he came onto the scene, he was the one who was able to take this message to all the corners of the country. And
Yeah.
I think that is the reason why people related so much to him. And for them, the freedom fight and he became synonymous. That was also, I think,
Synonymous. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, his power of communication. I mean, his ability to sort of articulate what he wanted, and for that to reach people who are so far away in such distant corners. It's a study by itself.
so one of our viewers, Rachel, says this. Uh, she put others too in her book second edition. She says, my mother crossed from East Bengal back to India during partition and she went there for her first job in a
Oh,
hospital.
wow.
So these experiences may
Excellent.
be something that you can
Yeah.
see.
So, I mean, I've thought about like sort of doing a podcast about this, and adding more stories in the podcast, because again, all of the people that I've spoken to for the book as well, I have recorded. But because of my, I mean, because of my need to earn a living, and I have a day job, and I write a column. I've just not found the time to do it, but yes, thanks, Rachel. And I would really like to do a little bit more about this, and sort of at least record a few more stories. And I don't know in what format it will eventually get published. But this has been a project that, and I've worked with a couple of podcast publishers on trying to sort of flesh it out. But I should sort of come back to it, because this is something that is really close to my heart, and I have to find a way to tell more stories about people who were around at that time, because I think they're a different caliber of people and human beings, and their sort of world vision has been crafted by the independence movement, and subsequently the industrial sort of age, and the second planning commission and things like that, that they provide the foil of history that I think a lot of people now lack, in the sense that sort of we like the post-liberalized India and the post-liberalized generation, I don't think they can even really fathom what these lives were like, and it's important to understand the foundations that have led us here, so that we are grounded in that. So yes, thank you. I would love to do more. I just have to figure out a format and find the time.
Well, we look forward to that. I mean, we really welcome that.
No pressure.
Now, you have also written in the introduction that most of us take freedom for granted. That's exactly what you were saying just now.
Yeah.
So, can I have your views on the present day trend of establishing nationalism through public expressions? That's become the trend now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I understand why sort of you do it, because I think there is something to be gained by it. Uh, what social media has brought to all of us is the ability to craft ourselves as opinion makers in areas, and when you see what works, you want to do more of that. So I think that right now there is definitely an upside to having staunch nationalistic views, and I have no problem with that. Except that I feel that there is a tendency to only see one side of the story, or to only see nationalism of 2023 as nationalism of 2023, and not nationalism that has sort of evolved and been crafted by our experiences in the last, say, 150 or 200 years. And so while public expressions are good, um, or public expressions can be good, I feel that there is a need to look at the country in a more granular form. And one of the problems that I think, in the way we Indians see ourselves, is that we only see what works for us, and there is people have to be sort of nudged to look around and see, whether something that works for us is working for everyone. And I think nationalism is great, but nationalism has to be inclusive, and in the very narrow way in which nationalism is often defined, especially in the context of social media. That worries me. I don't think it is being nationalistic to be exclusive. I think India's history sort of is one of being inclusive, and then therefore, if you are proclaiming your nationalism, it has to be in the context of that inclusiveness.
I can't agree more. So, would you like to read something from Independence Day?
Yeah, I will read a little bit. So, since you mentioned the Krishnanagar story, I think, read a little bit from there. I don't know how much time we have, so feel free to
Don't
stop
worry
me.
about the time. You just go
Okay.
ahead and read. I think everybody's waiting to. listen to you.
Okay, so this is a story, the story of a person called Tarun Kumar Roy. He was born in 1929 and he worked in the customs department until his retirement. So he grew up in this town called Krishnanagar, and I'm going to sort of read the bits in the sort of few weeks leading up to Independence Day. Um, Sorry, I had a page. Yes. My younger brother Shamal finished his matriculation the year I finished my intermediate. We both needed to secure college admission. Our results came out in July. Usually, college admission was an easy task. All we had to do was submit the fees and we could get enrolled. But Krishnanagar Government College was the only one in the area and there were a limited number of seats. We were worried that if we were late, we wouldn't get a place. But every time we went to the college, we heard that nobody would be admitted before 15th August, when the country would be divided and India would gain independence. This, of course, made us nervous. We were very anxious about where Krishnanagar would fall after the partition, whether it would be in India or East Pakistan. In Nadia, which is a neighboring district, Muslims were in the majority, so we were sure that that district would be divided. But we did not know which nation Krishnanagar would fall within. Hindus formed the majority in Krishnanagar, so we thought we would be in India, but it wasn't something we could be certain about. We had learnt that Cyril Radcliffe had submitted his report to Lord Mountbatten. Until the details of the report were published, there was nothing to do but wait and worry. If we had to temporarily live in Pakistan until the finer contours of the border were decided, it would be a catastrophe. There were only a few days left till 15th August. We couldn't go to college, we couldn't do anything, and this forced sedentary life, a kind of imprisonment really, became painful. When we woke up on August 14th, the first thing I thought was that the next day we would be citizens of a nation that was independent of British rule. Even if that independence would push us towards Pakistan, I would be able to breathe the air of a free country. I was cognizant of the fact that this was coming after many decades of political movements, armed and peaceful, and what separated us from freedom was just one night. And yet, for all my excitement and happiness, the worry of which side of the border we would end up in remained heavy in our minds. If Krishnanagar was to become a permanent part of East Pakistan after the division, then there were many question marks hanging over our future. At midnight, I stood in front of a radio shop. There was a huge crowd. We stood there, all of us, and heard Nehru speak the now famous words, our tryst with destiny. And that's how I knew that power had changed hands and we were citizens of the new nation of East Pakistan. Nobody felt happy about this. In the crowd, there was a significant number of Muslims, and they didn't look happy either. No firecrackers were burst. The next day, the sun rose in an independent Pakistan. The Pakistan flag was supposed to be raised in the town hall grounds, and I knew I had to go there because I used to hang out with senior members of the Congress in their office and was seen as a Congressy type. I did not want to be considered as part of the enemy camp, so to speak, now that we were in Pakistan. So I went there. I'm going to skip a little. Krishnanagar felt like a ghost town. As my friends and I walked its empty streets, I spotted the odd rickshaw or horse cart, and the passengers were usually a couple of men. No women could be spotted anywhere. Previously, in the relatively liberal environment of Krishnanagar, it was a familiar sight to see women on the streets, in groups or by themselves, but on this day, there were none. We too talked to ourselves in low voices. We didn't feel happy about gaining independence in Pakistan. It was a day spent in sorrow. Schools, offices, colleges, courts were all closed. The cinema was shut. No one was playing football in the fields. The entire town was waiting with bated breath for the Radcliffe report to be made public. 16th August was spent in the same way, but we read some news from Calcutta that gave us some strength. There were some stories of Hindu Muslim harmony in Calcutta from 14th August. There were small processions of each community that traveled to meet the other and gave them garlands, fed them sweets, and initiated hope for a new era of communal harmony. Nobody could imagine that such a thing could happen, and these were just ordinary people. Without caring a hoot about political leaders, they managed to stem the tide of year long Hindu Muslim riots in Calcutta. Of course, Gandhiji was a great influence behind this. It was the same the next day, a day of no real news, a day with the same old worries. Schools, colleges, and offices had reopened but were not functioning normally. We hoped the fate of Krishnanagar would be decided immediately. At midnight on 18th August, we heard the sounds of firecrackers and conch shells being blown. At first, we thought the riots that were thwarted for so long had started. We were totally disoriented, almost frozen in confusion and fear. But then we heard Gandhi's name being chanted and Congress leaders being hailed. We saw people were smiling and coming out on the streets, and that's when we realized that Krishnanagar was going to remain a part of India. All the Pakistani flags were brought down. Those who had raised them were the same people who brought them down. The district magistrate, Nasiruddin, transferred the responsibility to the new magistrate and left for his new workplace, Kushtia, which had become a part of East Pakistan. Strangers and friends were greeting each other with chants of Jai Hind. It may have been midnight, but the streets were filled with people. Everyone was filled, overwhelmed with emotion by the news. The newspapers from Calcutta came before daybreak and they were pounced upon. Even people who didn't usually buy or read the papers almost snatched them from the hands of the hawkers. We read that irrespective of a Hindu majority, Khulna had become a part of East Pakistan, and Murshidabad, which had a Muslim majority, was part of West Bengal. There was a meeting of all the leaders at the DM's office, and it was decided that on 19th August, a new celebration of attaining independence would take place, and that 18th August would be reserved to prepare for this. The city completely changed that day. Everyone had the flag pinned to their shirts and kurtas, and everyone was smiling. On the morning of 19th August, when I saw the kind of crowds of people on the streets of Krishnanagar, I wondered where these people were on the 17th. There was such a big crowd that one could get lost in it. Everyone was greeting each other with Jai Hind, smiling and shaking hands. I probably shook hands with more than 300 people that morning. My throat was sore from singing nationalist songs. The Muslim League MLA hoisted the Indian flag at the town hall ground. The real celebration took place in the evening and continued well into the night. The officials of various clubs delivered speeches. There were cultural programs, patriotic plays were enacted, songs were sung, and the crowds continued to throng the streets. Nobody went to sleep that night. So for me, this sort of a passage really it captures everything we discussed. The sort of very direct link between personhood and nationhood, the influence of Gandhi, the whole overhang of communal troubles, and and the ability to sort of rationalize to any new reality, and I can't imagine now thinking to tomorrow, am I going to be in a different country or am I going to be in the same country? And how sort of that determines the course of not just a new nation's life, but its people's lives. So this is his story is one of my favorites in the book because he's so articulate, and he had all of this actually written down in Bengali, and we got it translated, and it was fun. So
In fact, I'm going to put up a comment which actually tells you what all of us feel when we read all the stories. You feel as if you were there yourself. I mean, the fact that you had spoken to them and you had felt their emotions comes through in the book.
yeah, and so the one sort of lastly, the one sort of literary device that I was very careful was to not insert myself in any of those stories because I felt like the stories were so powerful and they're all lived experiences. I didn't think the reader needed to hear my opinion about something in the middle of that account. So each account therefore feels like a little film. It's one person, it's a child really looking at this world and wondering, oh my god, what is happening? And so as writers you are often tempted to insert yourself in it, and so I made the very difficult but I think the right choice of taking myself away from the narrative of all of these stories.
And that is why Mondira says they were true and so relatable to all
Thank
of
you
us.
so much.
That is what this book is all about. It was really, I mean, it really touched you, and you felt as though you were there when
Yeah,
all this. So
I'm so happy
beautiful.
to hear that. I mean, that was what I was hoping to accomplish.
So I think we'll have to now, you know, say goodbye for the present. I'm sure you'll come back, Veena, again with your next book, and we are looking forward to that. Whether it's a second edition of Independence Day or however, whatever way you want to approach it, we'd love to hear those stories. It could even, I mean, if it's a podcast or it's something else, that's great, and I'm sure it will reach a much larger, audience. If maybe if it's a podcast or it's on the social media or whatever. So thank you so much, Veena. It was wonderful talking to you and wonderful having you on Bistro Buzz.
Thank you so much. It was great talking, and it was great listening to the readers' comments as well. And Sutapa, you're like such a wonderful host that it
Thank you
felt
so
like we
much,
were just
Veena.
catching up.
Yeah, and have a very, very good evening. And thank you very much, viewers. Have a good evening. And we'll see you again on Bistro Buzz next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.